Hello, everyone. My name is Monique Collins, and I'm a graduate student in Emerson's Popular Fiction Writing and Publishing MFA program. I'm honored to introduce guest author Nalo Hopkinson, who joins us tonight at the fourth and final Emerson College Reading Series event of the year, sponsored by the Writing, Literature, and Publishing Department, as well as our new initiative, Afrofuturism Across the Arts. Jamaican-Canadian writer Nalo Hopkinson is a top speculative fiction writer, the author of numerous novels and short stories, as well as the lead author of The House of Whispers, a DC Comics series set in Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe. Just recently, Nalo received the Damon Knight Memorial Grand Master Award, a lifetime honor from the Science Fiction Writers of America, making her the youngest Grand Master and the first woman of African descent to win the award. Her novels include Brown Girl in the Ring, The Salt Rose, Sister Mine, and Sister Mine. Her writing often draws on Caribbean language and traditions. She's been a finalist for a Nebula Award and won a World Fantasy Award, as well as the Gaylactic Spectrum Award for positive LGBTQ representation. Nalo Hopkinson's writing has given me representation and joy. As a Gala Geechee woman, it is not often that I find my peoples in speculative fiction. But Nalo's stories provided me with a window to gaze out on and see myself, to feel the breeze of a language and culture very close to my own. In her writing, I find ancestry and artistry and inspiration. I am a huge fan. Please join me in welcoming Nalo Hopkinson.
Thank you so much, Monique, and thank you to Emerson and the program for having me here. Monique, when I hear Gullah talk, it sounds so much like Jamaican. I can about 3/4 understand it. It's so cool. So what I'm going to do is read a very short story. It's newly published. I'll tell you a bit of the background. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like being a writer, somebody with a couple of invisible disabilities. So the story is called Covenant. It was published in an anthology called Planet City. The editor is Liam Young. He's a professor and an artist. He's at SciArt in Los Angeles. And he gathered together a team of people, writers, artists, scientists, to look at the idea. There's a thought out there that we can rewild the world. We can undo a lot of the ecological damage we've done if we move all of humanity into one big city. So we had people look at what that city would be like, and he asked the fiction writers to write science fiction about it. My brain is a very contrary one, so the minute I told it you have to write a science fiction story, it said hell no. And what came out instead was an origin story of Planet City. So here's Covenant. Proverb. Your child wants to forget it used to be the baby whose ass you used to wipe. Understand, this city of Covenant wasn't always the city, wasn't always the place where all Earth's humans lived. For millennia before Covenant came to be, people had infested the whole of the Earth, devouring her goodness and shitting out ingratitude and poison into the air, the soil, and the water. But then Earth began to defend herself. She spit our poison back at us in the form of plagues and conflagrations, damn near killed us all. So we had to learn manners, you feel me? Had to learn to respect the lady, to stop chomping on her like a teething baby that still wants the titty. We had to let her have herself back to heal. So we built the city of Covenant and we retreated into it. We vowed to take nothing more from Mama Earth than we had already. We vowed to discard nothing more. We vowed ever after to break stuff we wasn't using down into its component parts and remake it into stuff we needed over and again, world without end. Thing is, we've been living here in Covenant so long that we kind of forget the way of it happening, so we make up stories about it. No, that ain't true. Of course we remember. Ain't we still designing and molding the modest magnificence that is the Ark of the Covenant? Don't we have history books and textbooks and more being written all the time? Don't we have scientists and teachers and artists and griots that carry our histories for us in one form or another and won't let us disremember them? We ain't forget shit. The real truth of it is, human beings make up fancy stories to tell each other. It is the most particular thing about us as animals. This is the story, as they told it once when I was visiting my suites in Arrondissement 21,000, in the tall purple tower called Tampopo. Night times, after the sun's gone down and is no longer throwing sparkling traceries of sunshine through the hollow mirrored webs that pierce all the towers in multiple places, bringing life-giving light down into the city's depths, folks who want to hang and jaw with other folks would rather be doing that than going to the movies or fucking or going dancing or who knows what all. I mean, they might do some of that, some of those things tomorrow or next week or in an hour or two, but for now, those folks want to go out onto the layered collars of balconies that ring Tampopo from top to bottom. They want to sup on a birra or a doob, watch their pickings climbing from level to level, and yell at them to take care. And they want to share stories, lobbing them from one balcony to another, each balcony continuing a piece of the tale. It's a bearing of witness, a sharing. And so what if they're bearing witness to something that's made the fuck up? Fact is, there's a deep truth in there, strong and curved as a spine. Here's what they shared that night. It began out in the world laid waste. It began with a potato. The eye of a potato, to be precise. This woman named Alilia, she had cut out the eyes of last night's potatoes for dinner with a sharp, sharp knife. She tossed the peel and the eyes into the garbage, because in those days, you tossed away shit you could use. It was legal, and folks even thought it was necessary. Don't get me started. But one eye had escaped Alilia. She found it on the kitchen table next morning, a little stubby, pale thing lying there like a maggot, ready to dry up and die. She picked the potato eye up and was about to throw it away, same as she'd done with the rest. The single, accusing bud stared at her. On her kitchen table was an empty waxed paper cup. Her morning coffee had been in there when she got it from the shop on the way back from her morning walk. Yes, paper covered in wax to make it waterproof. And then they'd throw it away, feel me. Any road, Alilia's steel cooking spoon held up when she used it to dig some soil out of the grass verge beside the sidewalk of her building. She had to do it that way. She wasn't allowed a garden where she lived, wasn't allowed a patch of soil. All the ground in her wee city was covered with paving or buildings or something called lawn grass that needed watering and watering, but that wasn't good for nothing, not to eat, not to improve the soil, not even really for pretty, to hear the old folks who were alive back then tell it. Them folks who lived out on the world was crazy. So yeah, our Alilia. She filled the cup with soil, buried the potato eye in it. The dryness of the soil against her fingers made her throat feel parched. Maybe the eye felt parched, she wondered. She didn't know shit about growing stuff, but she'd seen some things on TV. She ran some water from the kitchen tap into the cup. Then she put the cup onto the windowsill and forgot about it. Until the evening she came home from her job. That's a place they had to go to most days back then to do stuff they didn't like all freaking day, and somebody paid them a little bit of money for it. Money's a whole another crazy story. I'll tell you about that another time. And that Alilia, she looked into the cup on her kitchen windowsill and discovered an inch of eye stalk with 2 green leaves peeking out above the soil, complete with eye. At first she thought her own eyes were deceiving her until the eye stalk blinked. She touched it with a gentle fingertip. The eye part of the stalk retreated, snail-like, into itself, then emerged again. The iris was yellow-green. It shimmered. The soil in the cup was nearly dried out. Alilia poured a little water into it. The eye watched her warily. She put the cup back onto the windowsill, then scurried to her fridge to see what else was in the crisper. In just a few weeks, she had a little parade of coffee cups on the windowsill, another potato eye, a kohlrabi top, which was now growing 2 small paws, or maybe they were hands. A watermelon seed had sprouted a green lump which appeared to have 2 nipples. The root part of a green onion had yielded a snaky, scaled green tail which wagged slowly. 2 pink, fleshy frills came from a chunk of horseradish. They seemed to prefer being kept wet. The squash seeds never grew at all, but the pineapple crown was apparently turning into many small jaws with green, serrated baby teeth. When her indoor jungle seemed sturdy enough, Alalia transplanted them all into whatever she could find. Empty coffee cans, a bucket with a hole in the bottom, good for drainage, right? Rusted pots. She ranged them all along the outside wall of her ground floor apartment. The assemblage became the talk of her small apartment complex. In a few weeks, she knew more of her neighbors by name than she ever had before. Yeah, people didn't talk to each other much back then, unless they really wanted to. People had enough space to ignore each other. That part wasn't so bad. Any road, Philomene and Taisha in 212 suggested soft strips of t-shirt material for attaching the ever-lengthening eye stalks to the sticks Alalia had stuck into the containers to help support the plants. Vayu in 302 and his two daughters, Stevie and Joan, helped her to keep the plants watered. One Sunday afternoon, the guy who lived in 111 wheeled over to where Alalia was gently cleaning the teeth in the pineapple jaws with a soft toothbrush. On his lap was a garbage bag full of coffee grounds. He said they'd make good mulch. He'd even dried them out in his oven for her. They're cool now, he said. So you see, people back then weren't entirely stupid or wasteful. They were our ancestors after all. Must have been some good in them, as there is in us. The guy's name was Eladon, and he wondered if Alalia might like to go see a movie with him someday. Alalia's heart thumped as they made it a date. She'd noticed his strong arms. Now she'd finally get to ask him what the tattoos on them were. No, Zeta, I don't know what they were. They can be whatever you want them to be. Folding chairs and picnic umbrellas began to appear in the courtyard, surprising as gills on a horseradish. All summer, the neighbors hung out there chatting, sharing food and beer, watching their children romp like we're doing right now. The plants grew big enough to warp and burst their pots as the apartment complex waited to see what rough beast would assemble itself from Alalia's efforts. Nobody saw it happen. Just one morning, Alalia came out of her unit and found all the plants had vacated their containers, and what's more, they weren't plants no more. Instead, lying on the ground was a tiny green dragon, no bigger than a basset hound. No wings, it was a ladley worm. It just crawled to where it wanted to go. But it didn't go anywhere much. It knew it had a good thing right where it was. It ate a lot and grew fast. What it liked to eat best was the stuff people in the apartment complex threw away. The tasty, yeasty vegetable peelings and bits of rotting prot, and by prot, I mean actual chopped up animals someone had grown and killed for them, not the animal product we grow in vats nowadays. Them folks, they killed beings like themselves and ate them. I know, right? Bug fuck crazy and mean into the bargain. The dragon grew and began eating other discarded things, old sprung sofas and torn clothes and broken down bookcases. It grew so big that it couldn't crawl anymore. It settled itself around the apartment complex. Folks had to clamber over it to get to their jobs, but they didn't mind because no other apartment complex had a cool pet dragon. When the dragon grew big enough, it started eating other crazy things that people out in the world plagued her with in those days. Sidewalks and cars, lawn grass. It got so huge that it covered the apartment complex that had birthed it. Then it got so big that it covered the whole neighborhood and then the whole wee city. It shat out mounds of rich organic stuff. It shat out towers of the stuff. And the people in the city hollowed out the towers and made homes in them. And they didn't have to go to their jobs no more because they had everything they needed right there. They could work at whatever they pleased and have time to hang with their friends and their pickins and their sweets. And that's how the city of Covenant began, so some say. What's more, they say that one day, if we honor our covenant with the earth and show her that we're grown enough to act grown, she'll send us another baby dragon to feed and care for as it grows and grows. Only this one will have wings. And one day it'll be big and strong enough, and it'll unfurl the green, translucent glory of those wings. They'll be so huge, those wings, that they'll be able to sail on the wind of the sun's light. That dragon will sail us on its broad back and take us to find other beautiful worlds, not to use up, mind, but to live in and cherish. Waya Ben, story end. So, they asked me to talk a little bit about being a writer and the journey to being a writer, and I decided to talk about a thing, or three things really, that are a big aspect of my life. I have lost my notes because of what I'm about to tell you. There we go. I have adult attention deficit disorder. I have something called nonverbal learning disorder, which is a little bit like being on the autistic spectrum. I have fibromyalgia, which is an all-over body disease that causes soft body aches and can other symptoms, one of which is brain fog. You just get too foggy to think really clearly. And I did not discover any of these until I was perhaps in my 40s. I can't remember because, see, ADHD above. Before then, I just thought I was lazy. In school, I was really good at some subjects, not at all at others. That should have been a clue. If only anyone had known back then. One of the hallmarks of a cognitive disorder is that you score high or medium on some aspects of the test and low on others. I loved English class. That was just a doddle for me. I would read all the fiction before the school year even began, but struggled with anything else except biology up until they made it into biochemistry, and then it became math and I started to fail it. But before then, biology was a story to me, so it was as easy to remember as fiction I was reading. I couldn't do homework on time to save my life. My parents might have helped me if they'd known I didn't tell them. I was the one finishing assignments in between classes, trying to write in the car on the way to school, even though it made me dizzy, and berating myself for being lazy. When I wrote my first novel, probably in 1997, it came out in 98, I wrote most of it in a dead heat for a deadline I had given myself all of 2 months for, in this exhausting combination of avoidance and frenzied concentration. I got tested many years after that. I don't even remember now what led me to check my brain out. But 2 psychologists and a couple of bouts of testing, I had already learned that I had fibromyalgia, told me about the ADHD and the nonverbal learning disorder. Medication helps the ADHD to some extent, and to some extent the fibromyalgia, but nothing helps the nonverbal learning disorder. It's there, it's part of me, it's there for life. It is part of the way I think. I'm always struggling to get started with work. They call it, if you have ADHD, they call it procrastination, but to me, it's not. It feels like trying to force myself to start working on the thing that's due over and over and over again and being unable to do so. And it's exhausting. It's often feeling overwhelmed. It's a word that is so much part of my vocabulary. And also, I don't think of it as a deficit of attention, and some books will tell you that's not exactly right. It's a difficulty applying attention appropriately. They call it a cognitive disorder, an executive function disorder, meaning what the parts of your brain that decide things, what they do. So sometimes I have not attention deficit, but hyperfocus. I can watch pretty much all the seasons of Supernatural back-to-back 12 times, but not, pick up my grading and get it done on time. I have trouble recognizing faces and remembering names, which is great for somebody who's not only a teacher, but who is traveling the world as a writer, meeting people all the time. I once did not recognize somebody I was dating and had been dating for 4 years because I didn't expect to see him in the subway. He was wearing a sweater I'd made for him. So they must know. That makes it all sound negative, but there are pluses to it. I have, probably not as a result of how my brain is wired, but it probably helps. I have high verbal and conceptual ability, really good for a writer. I'm good at thinking outside the box, outside the norm. I'm not especially worried about fitting in, which I gather is also a relief, because I have no idea what it's like to worry a lot about fitting in. Some things I do want to, but mostly I don't care. I'm very enthusiastic about things when I am. And my low attention span is not a bad thing for a fiction editor. I know really, really quickly if the story's not working for me. There are things I've learned to do over the years since getting these diagnoses too that can help. And not all of them help all the time. First thing I had to do, well, meds. I'm on meds. I am legally on a lot of brain meds. And they made things about, I'd say, 60, 70% better. Strangely, the same meds that I take for the ADD also helped a lot of the fibromyalgia pain. I asked my psychiatrist once why that was. And at the time, he said, we don't know, we're fucking with your brain chemistry, which I appreciated for at least being an honest answer. They do have an idea now, but then they didn't. So that's one hack. If you can get diagnosed and get on medication that works for you. It doesn't work for everybody. The other is make your brain your friend. So after decades of thinking I was lazy and I was bad and I was, and being so avoidant when anything came up that I knew I was going to have trouble with, me and my brain had to sit down and have a chat. I had to say, all right, why do you do this kind of thing where you avoid work? And it said, well, work. And I said, are they things, the stuff you're avoiding, is it stuff you want to do? And it says yeah, sure, because I chose it. I want to have it done. So, all right, so I'm going to trust you as much as we can. If you want to go and watch, more Supernatural or look at old sewing patterns on eBay till your eyes turn red. But you let me know when you're at the point where you think we can do a little bit of this. That's beginning to work. It's beginning to trust me. And so I can trust it some more. Another hack, open the file. Writing is so hard. It is hard. The thing that'll keep me going sometimes is just opening the file. I don't have to promise my brain to do anything else, but this kind of brain is curious as hell. I open the file and it goes, ooh, that comma should be over there. And then an hour later, I've got some writing done. Break things up into smaller pieces, learn to master time, learn to triage. So I have learned just recently, like really, really recently, like this year, I have a long list of things I have to do when I'm panicking because I've been avoiding them or not avoiding them, trying to do them and not. And then I start thinking, okay, this kind of thing I know I can finish the half hour before it's due. This kind of thing, I need a little bit more time. It's got to happen here. Brain, are you hearing me? Yes, okay, we're going to work on that. And I've started basically manipulating time that way and breaking things up into smaller pieces. Don't try to pretend your brain is a neurotypical brain. It isn't. You can't force it to be. It has its own strengths. And let, as much as you can, the world is not very forgiving with this stuff, but as much as you can, work with the way your brain works. We have a dear friend, my primary partner and I, that we lived with for a few months. We had a room in his apartment, and I would hear him say he was self-employed, and people would want to schedule things with him, and then I'd hear him say, no, I can't answer that, that's a time thing. He knew he couldn't schedule things, and he wasn't going to pretend he could. This is the same guy who many years before, when my primary and I we were not exactly housed, and we were lucky if we could have one meal a day, and I was talking about being afraid of going hungry. Out of the blue, this friend emailed me and said, food, you can't go hungry. If you're hungry, talk to me. And if I'm not home, come and break into my house and steal my food. You have to have food. A couple of years later, I thanked him for that email. He said, hey, I don't remember that, but it sounds like something I would do. So he doesn't sweat the things that he knows are not his strengths. And that's been a big lesson to me. Other thing is to don't downplay your strengths. The stuff that's going to seem to me, working with words, the writing is hard, but I can write the hell out of a sentence that's really short. I can do it. And that's not difficult. But for some people, that's like rocket science. even if it feels easy for me, I've had to learn that it's not for other people. So that doesn't mean it isn't a strength just because it feels easy. And ask for help. It's, I'm just learning to try that, to say, this is too much for me, can I have help doing it? Or can you just sit with me while I do this? Or I am clutching on how to schedule this class. Can we have a Zoom hangout? So all of that is informing my writing practice, as well as the achiness and the fatigue and the health stuff that comes with fibromyalgia. Some days I get done a class, or I'm doing 7 hours on Zoom, never that much, but 3 will do it, and I have to crawl to my bed. Some days I just fall asleep where I am. And I've had to build that into the way I work. I think I'll stop it there and see if there are questions people have. But thank you all for listening.
I'm muting. Thank you so much, Nalo. That was such a moving and incredibly honest and open and really rare, I think, discussion. And I so wish that my students that we've talked about earlier, my students at Concord, could hear that, because, you know, I talked with them. I don't know, for folks who weren't here earlier, I'm teaching Afrofuturism and Nalo's work at MCI Concord, which is a medium security men's prison, and our class was interrupted by the pandemic. So the trauma, the literal physical trauma that the students have undergone in the past year is not to be imagined even. And the way that you talk about dealing with physical trauma and understanding yourself as the writer you want to be, and making use of your strengths and allowing your vulnerabilities is just so beautiful and so meaningful. And I love what you said, play to your strengths. Don't sweat the things you know are not your strengths, but also play to your strengths and don't discount them as strengths just because for you they work, right? That's really beautiful.
The world will make you have to stress the things that you don't do well. The world is organized around assuming everybody has a neurotypical brain. And sometimes you can't get away from that. But sometimes you and your brain can kind of collude and figure out ways to manage it.
That was really, it's very wonderful. And I love the sentence too, make your brain your friend, right? Yeah, that don't, fight against this sense of that we all incorporate so many little narratives, right? That we've been told about, you're not good enough because of X, you're doing the wrong thing because of Y. And it's so much about that self-talk of realizing this is what I'm working with, and this is who I am, and it works, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
works in its way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit about continuing on some of the conversations that we began in the Q&A. So until I hear, if folks want to add questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. And I think they go to Roy, and I'll find them out and we can share them. But one of the things we had been talking about earlier this evening was, well, let me ask you one thing too, another question that my students at Concord had asked, which I think I'm drawing on Monique's phrasing about, I love the way you said, I'm a Gullah Geechee girl, right? And that you recognize that Gullah Geechee background has an affinity to what Nalo is doing in her work in terms of Jamaican culture and Trinidadian culture. So I really love that sense of the African diaspora. And one of the things my students at Concord asked was, what are some stories throughout the African diaspora that still need to be told?
All of them.
I was gonna say, it could be an infinite question, right?
I think that's best decided by the people who want to tell them. And one of the things that I hear from people is, oh, somebody else had that story idea already. Well, you could give everybody on this call a piece of Play-Doh and say, make a tree, and you would have as many trees, different trees, as you have people. So you know what the stories are you're longing to hear that you don't. Make them, or put some noise out there in the world. Maybe somebody else it hasn't occurred to them to tell a story like that. Make those. I would love to see more stories about non-traditional types of relationships, for instance, relationships that aren't built on the couple. I always love stories in which children get to take agency and get out in the world and do stuff. For a while, I realized that a lot of my stories would have a young child and a grandparent sort of allied, going out to the world and doing stuff. Well, I have no children and I'm nobody's grandparent, so I wondered what is that about? And I realized that neither one of those have to go to work.
Oh,
every
great.
day. Yeah, the really young ones are not in school yet. The grandparents are done with the regular job. They're now free to go and have adventures. Thank you, Akiba. So yeah, decide what stories there are that that you want to hear told, and either write them or put the word out. One of the questions I didn't get to answer from the previous session was the one from the gentleman in the prison where you work, and they had asked about what I thought about Black horror, stuff like Jordan Peele, and if I have any films in the works. There is a film called Brown Girl Begins. It's a feature film. It was made by Trinidadian Canadian director Sharon Lewis. It is inspired by my first novel. It's inspired by Brown Girl in the Ring. Other than that, not so much. I think I'm still a bit of a strange animal because I'm Black, but I'm Caribbean. The Caribbean culture inflects my work strongly. I think directors don't yet really know what to do with that. We'll see. But the thing about Black horror is it makes perfect sense. When I first started thinking about Black people writing horror, I thought, well, why would you do that? I know some of my work is horrific, but I can't read or watch horror. It scares me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I realized to be Black in much of this world, you are living a body horror. I have Black friends and family and intimates. They go out into the world, and I don't know if they're going to come back. I don't know if a cop will shoot him. We're having that trial happening right now. So I think it, and this has been true for centuries, that our bodies have been, Black bodies have been fodder when they try to tell us we don't own them and they can do what they want with them. So horror makes perfect sense. Yeah. I love what Jordan Peele is doing. I go and I watch his work because I wanted to show willing, and I wanted the man to be able to keep making the work. So I would read all the spoilers I could find so I wouldn't be too scared. So I would know when to look away from the screen. But he's doing some really clever stuff.
I mean, when I read the character of Shakpana that you wrote in House of Whispers, he's pretty scary. I mean,
I didn't have to make him up. He comes from the religion.
Yeah.
In fact, I tried to sort of think about what it must be like to be him. So I found some way to kind of not redeem him. He doesn't need to be redeemed. He's a god. He does what he does. But to sort of think, well, maybe this job he has, being the god of pandemics, isn't him. Maybe it's his job. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Terrifying. Yeah. He's terrifying anyway.
He was very terrifying. Yeah. We have a question from Monique. Monique, thank you so much. Monique asks, how do you incorporate your native language into your stories in a way that feels natural and intelligible?
Trial and error. I'm lucky enough that I come from, my dad was a writer, poet, playwright, actor. A lot of his colleagues were the writers of his generation in the Caribbean. So I come out of a Caribbean tradition of writers claiming our languages and saying, this is not bad English or bad French or whatever, this is how we speak. And linguists examining our languages and saying, yes, there's a grammar here, there's a vocabulary there. This is not a broken anything, it is just itself. And so watching all those people write in our vernaculars was already an education for me. What can happen sometimes if it's a language that has sort of come out of a bunch of others is that you're not sure what to do with pronunciation. And for me, it depends on the word. Usually I will spell things in, say if I'm working with Trinidadian English, I'll spell in English, conventional English, but keep the rhythms.
What detail planning I should be doing from this stage on?
Excuse the sound in the background there. The difficulty comes when the word has become so much itself that spelling it as it's in conventional English is not going to make any sense. So there's the Jamaican word maga. It means really, really, really skinny.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to guess the origin of that is meager.
Yeah.
Right. If I write meager on the page, it doesn't look right. So I had to come up with a phonics way of just spelling maga and hoping by context people would get it. So sometimes you don't explain, you don't italicize. I fight every publishing house that wants me to do that. I instead use the word in a context that people can understand it. And everybody has access to a vernacular of some kind, many people more than one. I have heard Brown Girl in the Ring read in Trinidadian English, in New Orleans working class English, in Ontario, Canada, farm girl English, and people just move into the rhythms they know, and it kind of works. So I practice. I put it down on the page, read it out loud. That helps. It's a long question, but those are some of the things I do.
That's great. I mean, thank you. That's great advice for writers. I think the reading out loud is really such a key part of getting that down, the sense of dialogue. Do you want to ask more, Monique, since you're right here? Like, do you want to add to follow up or anything?
Go ahead.
Kind of shy, but that really helped a lot. Gaylactic wasn't a written language, so it's kind of hard to navigate that. So thank you for your advice.
Yeah, same with Jamaican, Trinidadian. Jamaican a few years ago was declared a language. So now there are standard spellings, but when I was writing it, no, there weren't. And people who are writing, because people have been writing in vernaculars forever. People would try to spell it phonetically, and that kind of sort of worked. You come up with what works for you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
We have a question from Professor Kim McLaren, who said, you said earlier that you find yourself less interested in reading fiction. What's that about? What do you think? Because Kim's saying she finds that as well. And Kim is a novelist as well and has also written nonfiction pieces recently. And so, yeah, what's going on, do you think, with the state of fiction?
I wish I knew. Fiction is not the problem. Fiction's amazing. And every year I buy the books and I read blurbs and I hear other people talk about them. The problem is not the fiction at all. I have no idea. I was talking with another writer about it a couple of days ago, and she's not sure either. I just hope that, I think part of it is with this brain, when something becomes work, the brain is like, can't we just go and, I don't know, grow things in grass or make costumes? So partly I think it's that it's now my job to both read and write. I think partly it's that I've grown older. It's more difficult to engage and surprise me. So I sort of wander away. Partly it's that I am now 16 trillion times more busy than I was when I wasn't a writer. There's always something else that needs doing. And nowadays, if I sit down with a book and try to read it, I fall asleep. The brain is like, no, what's more important here? Rest or you read a great book. I'm hoping that it'll come back. And I'm practicing, I'm picking books up and reading them. I'll get 10 pages in, but I'm practicing. And maybe if I ever get to retire and I'm less busy, it'll come back. But I do miss it. I used to be able to read a book in a day. And I say read for ADHD forms of read, which means I skim it, look for the monsters, read the cool bits. But I could get through most of a book in a day. I can still do that if I had a day. So there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's pandemic brain is a thing, I think. I find, I really do. I think it's definitely affected us all, right? All the Zooming, all the things.
Yeah.
We're being pulled in so many different directions that are unusual from our normal. I personally am a person that likes to leave my house, and I work best in a library, Carol. It just allows me to block everything out, and my library's been closed for 1 year now. So yeah, you don't have your usual modes of dialing other things out and focusing in. You're doing everything in your...
And I can't dial anything out. So, but this happened to me well before the pandemic. The pandemic is not helping at all. I have no idea how I keep making my meetings and my classes because I really don't know what day or time it is. It's just this sort of floating miasma.
Yeah.
I'm going to hush for a sec. Small apartment, you have to share the space.
Yeah.
So, this was happening well before. I still read a lot of nonfiction, also lots of which is brilliant, and I need it for research for my work. Fiction is harder.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about research. I know one of the things that I love about Brown Girl is the way you say at the end, I didn't know all of this. I had to research some of it. This idea that, okay, yes, I grew up in this is the milieu I'm writing about, but it also takes research. And I teach students about diaspora literacy, Vere Clark's term of diaspora literacy, that if you didn't come up with a knowledge of Orishas or Vodun or, particular Yoruban spirituality, you might have to do some work to approach the novel with a form of knowledge and literacy, really. And so I love the idea that, a writer is always doing that kind of research, whether they're writing speculative fiction, writing creatively, whatever. Yeah,
writers, artists are always researching all the time. And my inspiration for saying that comes from writer Larissa Lai, who has, at the end of one of her novels, she says, I didn't grow up with all these celestial grandmothers and who sat around the fire and told me tales. I went to the library.
Yeah.
And when I was a grants officer for the Toronto Arts Council, I would get to read people's grant proposals where they were talking about their process. And everything from choreography to visual arts, people were researching things that had caught their fancy so that they could then explore the idea deeper. It is part and parcel of making art. Sometimes it's even more fun than making the art because somebody's already done that research. You can just enjoy it. And you find out such amazing things about the world, even your own world, that you didn't know.
Oh, great. We've got more questions. From Julie, in terms of opening the file, yes, and befriending your brain, do you have special rituals and cultivated habits that help you focus on the work? That's a great question.
Yeah. I blame the ADD, but it might just be me. I don't have writing habits. I just try to throw myself at the laptop often enough that writing happens. I am better in the morning. That didn't always used to be so. It used to be two in the morning rather than 7 in the morning. But I'm better in the morning. So if I have to do something like writing, I'll try to do it then. I'm blessed to have a writing group of people who meet every weekday morning from 8 to 11. And so if I have a project that I'm working on, I can join them and we talk for a bit and then we sit and we write in each other's company on Zoom.
Wow.
So when I talk about getting people to help you, networks that can help you is another thing. I know people who do meditation, who do stretching, who do like candles. If it works as a trigger or as a way of getting your brain into that space, then use it. For me, it's open the file.
Open the file. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Literally, Google Doc kind of just changed my life because it was always, I could never say that the file wasn't available. Like, that's how it worked for me. I was like, it's right there. You just have to open it. It's right there.
That's what I do with my work emails now. Work emails always open. Otherwise, I'm just going, I didn't get that email.
Yeah. A question from Katie, our colleague, Katie Williams, who a wonderful writer herself, says, a follow-up to Kim's question, what nonfiction books or topics have you been reading lately?
Tom Goro. I finally remembered the name of the scientist I was talking about in the previous hour who pioneered the biorock technology for resanding beaches and bringing coral.
Oh, yeah.
Thomas Goro, Jamaican scientist, lovely man.
Oh, can you spell it? I'll put it in the chat for folks because that's actually an important name. There. Oh, Thomas Goro. I see. Thank you so much.
Yes. What nonfiction books? It depends on what I am working on. So what have I recently finished working on? Yes, I finished a novelette recently where I was reading more about, I needed to know what plants and animals will remain alive once there's so much carbon dioxide in our oceans that most of the rest have died. I needed to research pig intelligence. I had a character that was a pig, and I needed to know how much I could assume that he could do or think or say. Also, and that may be how I discovered that there is there are wild pigs that live off the coast of Bermuda. They got left there by a boat that had brought them for food and didn't kill all of them. And the rest stayed and made their homes on the beaches. And pigs can swim. Their trotters have membranes between them. They can swim quite happily. So they'll swim out to the boats and they put their snouts up in the air like little tiny snorkels. And they swim out to the boats because they know that tourists will feed them. So you learn stuff that you wouldn't otherwise. So I'm reading a lot about ocean level rises. I'm reading about old figurines, old racist figurines, because I put them in another story, like where they come from, finding out that in fact a lot of them are reproductions, which is utterly horrifying. But whatever, I need to research, and sometimes it's just fun. Like I subscribe to phys.org, which is an online physics magazine that writes in language I can actually understand. And I might not be reading any more than the headlines, but I tuck those away to go and search for later.
I actually, Katie, do you have a follow-up? I do have a follow-up on pig intelligence, if you can believe it, because my students at Concord had a question about that, because the way in which Brown Girl in the Ring, centers on this idea of pig transplant of pig organs into humans really raises questions for students about the privileging of the lives of human animals over non-human animals. And students had a question about what's going on with the relationship between non-human animals and human animals. And
in that particular novel?
Or in other parts of your work too, because you don't seem to, I think there are lots of ways that your work doesn't put a hierarchy in place between human animals and non-human animals.
It doesn't, and I am a meat eater. I'm not a vegetarian, and yet it's an ethical question I ask myself all the time. And no, I don't put a hierarchy because I don't think we exactly know. Just yesterday, I was talking to a group of, many of them are scientists working on machine intelligence and animal intelligence. And there are so many different kinds of intelligence. Would we even recognize some of them?
Yeah, I've seen that same question. How would we know if we're smarter than animals? We can't ever know.
We can't ever know. I mean, maybe we can at some point. I'm sure there are people doing empirical research, but it almost doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's not as smart as you, do you treat them with any less respect? So I don't put a hierarchy. The porcine, the transgenic pigs in Brown Girl in the Ring, and remember, it's a book written in 1997, 96. I was doing research into what the next wave of medical innovation would be. And at that point, it was all about being able to grow transplanted organs on the backs of, or in the bodies of pigs that were bred to have no way to reject them. This is what we do now.
Yeah.
We do animal experimentation. The lipstick I'm wearing might have been, come from animal experimentation. It is horrific, and we are doing it. So it's in the book because of when the book was projecting into, which is a very near future, it'd still be doing that. And it also just didn't occur to me to do it different, to be honest. It's the kind of thing that would occur to me more now.
Mm-hmm. And it's also in the novel, it becomes like a moral question, right, for the prime minister, and yet she only has a real moral sensibility once she has mommy's heart, right? She has a literal change of heart.
A literal change of heart. And that was also research where I learned that when you have an organ transplant, the ones that take are where not only do cells from the host body move into the transplant, but cells from the transplant move into the host body.
Mm.
So they do a little literal sort of almost handshake and exchange of genetic material, and then they can get along.
Yeah. It's the metaphors in that whole scene work so well. It's beautiful.
It was fun to write.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it's just stuff I haven't thought of. Any kind of art, making any kind of critical thought, scholarship develops along the lines, it deepens as your own thought deepens. So that's my first novel. And yeah, there are things I just hadn't thought of. I remember somebody a couple of years ago asking me why a particular book of mine didn't have any trigger warnings, why the publisher hadn't put any trigger warnings on them. It was 1998. Trigger warnings weren't a thing. So there's a historicity to sometimes to why things have happened the way they have.
Yeah. Well, before we let you go, what's next? What's on the horizon?
I have finished a novel, which as I said, I had been struggling with for 13 years. Got it done. It is at my agent's. We'll see what happens next with that. I have finished a novelette, so just slightly over 10,000 words, which is the minimum length for novelette, that I'm also shopping around. I am shopping around a graphic novel project with 2 artists who are lovely, lovely people who know their job much better than I do. They've been doing it much, much longer. And that's going to be fun. It's going to incorporate some historical characters with some fantastical stuff. And that's about as much as I can tell you about that. I have my first piece in a gallery as of yesterday.
Oh, congratulations. That's exciting. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. I've seen Nalo's art on Instagram and things, and it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Some of it's on my website, but this piece is actually in a gallery. So I got to text my younger brother, who had his first art show when he graduated in way back in the annals of time. He's now 54. It's like, I'm catching up. I'm your older sibling. I'm finally catching up. So I'll be doing more of that, hopefully, to make more room, because my practice isn't just words. And always food. I'm always experimenting with food.
Cooking and baking.
Yep.
That's wonderful. Any other questions folks want to ask? It's a small group now. If you want to just pipe up, please unmute yourself. Well, it's been a very, very exciting evening. Julie, you want to say something?
Thank you so much, Nalo. I mean, I found this talk so moving in so many ways, and I'm going to write you a note tomorrow, because I have a son who's ADHD and he's learning to be friends with his brain, and I'm not sure how, but I really hope that I can get him to watch this talk.
It's a really good brain. Really, the ADHD brain is a really good brain.
No, I know it is. I know it is. I don't have one, but I know it is. So
it doesn't play by the rules, but it's a good brain.
No, not at all. But I've watched it grow, and I'm like, that brain is fine. That brain is fine.
Yeah.
So, but I love that story too. I'm totally ordering that anthology. Really great all around. It was such a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for being with us.
We have one more question.
Akiba's got a hand up.
One more question.
Akiba has a hand up. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Nalo. My name is Akiba Abaka. I am a fellow Jamaican. Grew up here in the United States. I'm sure you've heard this throughout your whole career, but just a really extra special thank you from a little girl from the island in the sun who always wanted to write, and just thank you for writing. Thank you for writing, and thank you for writing what you've written. And you mean the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Akiba. It always means a lot. Thank you.
Akiba has been working. One of the many things that she does here at Emerson is she's helping coordinate Toshi Regan's residency. We have Toshi Regan. You and I talked about this. Yeah.
Yes.
Nalo told me that the last, what was it? The meat centered, or the
last meat space.
The last meat space that she was in before the pandemic was attending Toshi's opera of Parable of the Sower, Akiba.
I think Toshi knows me. I'm not sure, but you can just
I will send your love. I will send your love to her, and that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, that was such an incredible event when we had that at Emerson as well. And yeah, Toshi's presence at the Arts Emerson residency has been such a boon to Emerson. It's really been great.
Yeah, Toshi's brilliant.
I just want to add my thank you. It was fantastic, and I enjoyed every bit of it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to be with us. I got so much out of it, and my husband, the engineer, got a lot out of it too. So.
Good. I love the cross pollination.
Okay.
Well, everybody,
very
thank
much.
you.
Maybe
Thank
we
you for
can
coming,
end
everybody.
with some applause.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Good evening,
All right.
everyone. Thank you for
Bye.
the reading.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nalo.